welcome to the voter registration training for Texas Library staff and volunteers. My name is Heather Lowe, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Dallas Public Library.
And I am Dr. Annie Johnson-Benefield, Vice President of Voter Services, President-elect for the League of Women Voters Houston.
And I am Teresa Carvajal Raved, a member of the League of Women Voters of Hays County and a member of the Friends of the Dripping Springs Community Library in Dripping Springs, Texas. And together we are going to make sure that libraries understand the duties of providing voter registration opportunities to their patrons.
The National Voting Rights Act overview. To begin, you might be wondering where these duties come from. In 1993, Congress passed the National Voter Registration Act, or NVRA, which requires each state to designate certain types of publicly funded offices as voter registration agencies. These voter registration agencies are meant to provide easy access to voter registration all across the country. In 1995, the state of Texas designated public libraries as one category of publicly funded offices that are required to serve as voter registration agencies pursuant to the federal law. Since that time, libraries across the state have served a key role in providing access to voter registration in nearly every Texas community, big and small.
Why libraries? In deciding to designate public libraries as voter registration agencies, the Texas legislature recognized the important role that libraries play in their communities and their ability to reach groups of people who may find it difficult to register to vote elsewhere, including low-income voters, rural voters, voters with disabilities, young voters, voters who experience homelessness, and voters who move residences frequently. In this way, libraries are an essential component in encouraging good citizenship and community engagement in very diverse and often underserved communities.
What are the NVRA requirements? The most basic requirement for voter registration agencies include Texas libraries is very simple, that every library patron must be affirmatively offered the opportunity to register to vote every time they register for a new library card, renew their library card, or change their address with the library. This means that any library staff member or volunteer who interacts with library patrons in these types of situations must ask the patron, "Would you like to register to vote?" This is an affirmative offer of registration, not just providing a stack of forms on a table. Voter registration must be offered to every single library patron in these situations unless the library's records already indicate that the person would not be eligible to register to vote. Generally, this exception applies to minors who the library's records indicate are younger than 17. While a voter must be 18 years old to register to vote, voters who are at least 17 may still be able to register if they will turn 18 years old before the next election. An exception might also apply if your library requires citizenship information in order to obtain a library card. If that is the case, you do not need to offer voter registration to those patrons who have identified themselves as non-citizens at the time of the current transaction. It is important to note, however, that previous records of citizenship may not be accurate at the time of the renewal or address change, as more than 100,000 Texans become naturalized citizens every year. This means that you must still offer voter registration to patrons if the library records indicate that a patron was not a citizen at the time of the previous application for library services. However, if your library does not collect information on age or citizenship as part of its regular library card registration procedures and application, then these exceptions do not apply and every person must be offered registration. Libraries are prohibited by state law to inquire into the eligibility of potential voters unless that information is already collected as part of the normal library record. In addition to offering registration, if a library patron indicates that they would like to register to vote, library staff or volunteers are also required to provide assistance with the application to the same extent that they provide assistance with the library-owned forms. This could mean providing assistance with filling out the form, assistance in a different language, or other assistance depending on the regular procedures of the library. Once a voter has completed a voter registration form, the library staff member or a volunteer must offer to accept the form for the voter, and the library must submit that form on behalf of the voter directly to the appropriate county voter registrar within 5 days. Unlike voter registration applications put in the mail, applications submitted to a library are backdated by the voter registrar to be effective on the day that the library received them. This is why it is extremely important that libraries deliver these forms directly to their county voter registrar and not simply drop them in the mail. If a voter registration deadline is approaching, failing to comply with this requirement could result in the library inadvertently causing a voter to be barred from voting, even though they registered on time.
Using the correct forms. Libraries are required by state law to use the official voter registration application created for libraries by the Texas Secretary of State. While there are other generic registration forms that would be effective for registration purposes, this library-specific form is coded so that the county voter registrar and the Secretary of State can determine that it originated with a public library. These forms are available for free by simply requesting them through the Texas Secretary of State's online form or by calling the Elections Division of the Secretary of State's office. All libraries in Texas should have a sufficient supply of registration forms at all times, including in English, Spanish, and any other language that your county may require. For example, many counties in Texas are required by federal law to provide voting materials in certain Asian languages. If you are unsure about the requirements for your library, your county voter registrar will be able to provide this information.
Providing assistance with the form. Library staff must provide assistance with the voter registration form if requested. And for that to be possible, they must be familiar with the forms and requirements of registration. While library staff are prohibited from making determinations as to the person's eligibility as previously explained, they should be able to explain the eligibility requirements to potential voters. The eligibility requirements are listed explicitly on the voter registration application and require that potential voters must A. Be a United States citizen, B. Be at least 17 years and 10 months old, C. Be a resident of Texas, D. Not have been finally convicted of a felony, or if they have been convicted of a felony, that they have fully completed their term of incarceration, parole, supervision, or probation ordered by a court. E. Not have been declared totally or partially mentally incapacitated without the right to vote by a court. Once any questions regarding eligibility have been answered for the voter, the library staff should be able to competently walk a potential voter through each section of the voter registration application if requested. Section 1 of the application covers eligibility and asks the voter to indicate whether this is a new application, a change of address, name, or other information, or a request for a replacement card. It then asks the voter to declare their citizenship status and declare whether they will be 18 years old on or before Election Day. If the answer to either of the two above questions is no, the applicant should not fill out the rest of the application. Section 2 of the application asks for the voter's name, including any former name they may have used. It is very important that the voter use the same name that appears on the Texas driver's license or ID card if they have one, because this information will be cross-checked by the Texas Secretary of State. Section 3 of the application covers the voter's residence address. This address must be in the county of registration. If the voter does not have a residence, they may list an address where they regularly receive mail or location where they generally may be found. Section 4 is optional and requests an alternate mailing address. This address may be used if mail from the voter registrar is returned to sender. Section 5 requests information on former residents in Texas, if applicable. This information will be used to make sure that the voter does not appear on voter rolls in more than one county at the same time. Section 6 requests the voter's date of birth, which is mandatory to determine eligibility. Section 7 requests gender information, which is optional and may be omitted. Section 8 requests the voter's telephone number, which is optional but may be used by the county voter registrar if any questions about the application arise, and for other issues that might arise in the future related to the voter's ballot cast in an election. Section 9 asks for the voter's identifying information. The applicant must include one of either their Texas driver's license number, personal identification number issued by the Texas DPS, or the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. If the applicant has not been issued any of these numbers, they will check the appropriate box indicating that fact. If they have been issued one of these numbers but do not know the number, they will need to find the number before submitting their application. Section 10 requires an acknowledgement and signature. Applications must be signed in order to be accepted. It is also important that applicants use their normal signature because the signature on this form may be compared to other signatures from the voter. For example, on a later application to vote by mail, and could result in a rejection of the voter's ballot if the signatures do not match.
Collecting and submitting the form. After the library provides the form and any needed assistance, a voter is permitted to keep their voter registration application if they wish to mail or deliver it to the voter registrar themselves. However, library staff members must make it clear that they are able to accept the form with an immediate effective date, thereby saving the voter the additional effort and postage of returning the forms themselves. Libraries may not take any action that discourages the voter from returning the form directly to the library, including encouraging them to drop the application in the mailbox, even if that mailbox is on the premises. Once the library receives an application from a voter and before the applicant leaves, the library staff member must review the application to ensure it's complete. The staff member is not required to look for errors in the application, but must ensure that all required information has been entered and that the applicant has signed the document. If any section is skipped or incomplete, the staff member must return the application to the voter indicating where it is incomplete. After an application is checked for completeness, the library staff member must accept the form for submission to the county voter registrar. The library must return the form to the appropriate county voter registrar in person within 5 days of the day it was submitted to the library. For many libraries, this may require 1 trip per week. It is important that the county voter registrar knows that the forms are coming from a library, so it is not possible under current law for these forms to be mailed by the library. If your library serves more than 1 county, you may either return registration forms to the county in which the particular voter resides, if possible, or you may return all forms to the county voter registrar in the county in which the library is physically located, and they will be forwarded to the correct county. A list of county voter registrars and their contact information is maintained by the Texas Secretary of State's website.
Prohibited acts. While there are many ways that library staff must assist a potential voter, it is also important to understand what library staff may not do. The Texas Election Code prohibits library staff from trying to influence the person's political preferences or party, and from displaying the staff member's political preference or party. Additionally, library staff are prohibited by law from taking any action that would discourage registration. For example, indicating that the form is really long and complicated that voting isn't important or indicating that the voter must mail the form themselves. And finally, library staff are also prohibited from taking any action that would indicate to a patron that their decision to register to vote will make them receive better or worse service from the library.
Additional library procedures and best practices. There are a number of other procedures that libraries are required to perform or should perform as voter registration agencies. In addition to the requirements already explained, libraries are required to make sure that all employees and volunteers who may interact with library patrons have completed training on voter registration procedures, such as the training you are receiving now. Best practices include providing annual updates to employees and volunteers, and including training as part of the onboarding process for new hires and volunteers. Additionally, libraries are required to keep an up-to-date NVRA implementation plan on file with the Texas Secretary of State. If your library's policies or procedures have changed, this plan must be updated immediately so that the changes may be evaluated and approved by the state authority in charge of enforcing these rules. Additional best practices include making forms available to all patrons in visible areas of the library, making clear that library staff is able to accept these forms directly without any need to mail them, providing links to voter registration forms on the library's public website, and providing nonpartisan voter guides in public areas to help educate potential voters about what and who will be on their ballots.
Thank you for attending this training and for serving your community in so many ways. If you have additional questions regarding voter registration or procedures for libraries, or if you want to refer a voter with questions, you can contact the Elections Division of the Secretary of State or reach out to nonpartisan voting rights advocates at a number of organizations such as the League of Women Voters of Texas or the Voting Rights Program at the Texas Civil Rights Project.